So welcome everyone. Good evening or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. So welcome to STEM to the Skies April speaker panel. This is in honor of Earth Month, which is about climate change, environmental science, and sustainability. Today, our speaker panel is titled "Making an Impact: Sustainability Careers that Change the World." So we're really excited to have three amazing professionals in the field join us today. My name is Eileen, and I'm a senior going to Montgomery Blair in Maryland, and I'm one of the co-founders of STEM to the Sky.
Hi, my name is Annie. I'm also a high school senior from Maryland. I also go to Blair, and I'm the other co-founder of STEM to the Sky. We're incredibly excited to have you guys here today, so thank you all for joining us or for listening in later.
My name is Anaga. I am a junior also at Montgomery Blair High School in Maryland, and I'm the International Marketing and Outreach Director here at STEM to the Sky. I would just want to say thank you to everyone who's here today, and a special thank you to our panelists, Dr. Anand Gnanadesikan, Dr. Cinda Scott, and Dr. Tatiana Loboda, who will be sharing their experiences and insights within their respective fields of environmental science.
Awesome. Great. Okay, so today's event aims to share the experiences and advice of experts in environmental science, as well as to inspire our audience interest in this field and the wide variety of opportunities and careers within environmental science's broad scope. So everybody in the audience today will have the opportunity to ask questions about our panelists' experiences with pursuing environmental science, as well as their specific area of expertise. And so we're really excited to have our three panelists today with us to share their knowledge and experiences with working in this field.
So here's an overview of today's event. First, we'll have Eileen and Annie briefly introduce STEM to the Sky, and then our three amazing panelists will introduce themselves and they will give a general overview of their backgrounds and careers. Then we will transition into the main part of the event, a live Q&A and discussion. Using the topics all of you guys have provided from the event RSVP form, the panelists will offer deeper insights into what pursuing a career in environmental science and sustainability really means. And then we will open up the floor to any questions from the chat, or you guys can ask questions out loud.
And to wrap up the event, oh, sorry, Naga. We'll also share the panelists' contact information in case you guys want to reach out with any further questions, and then we'll discuss how to get involved with STEM to the Sky. Great. Now I'll be handing it off to Annie, who will explain a little bit more about STEM to the Sky.
Yeah, thanks, Eileen. So STEM to the Sky is a student-led 501c3 nonprofit. It was founded in 2020 by Eileen and I, and our mission is to empower middle, high school, college students around the world, no matter their background, to pursue their STEM interests. So some of the ways we do this are by conducting and posting interviews with STEM professionals on our website and hosting speaker events like this one. So we can go ahead and post some of the links in the chat to our website and some of our social media platforms if you're interested in taking a look at some of our interviews or our past speaker panels. So yeah, there's a little bit about our mission and then also our initiatives. We also host Sunday spotlights on some of our social media platforms, which provide short snippets of science information about specific topics in STEM. So currently we have over 30 team members and 35 interviews featured. We've reached over 80 countries internationally, and a large part of our audience base is international. And we've also reached over 300 schools internationally, and I think around 150 of them are international schools based in East Asia. And now I'll pass it off to Anaga for the panelist introductions.
So yeah, we'll start the panelist introductions. Without further ado, please welcome Dr. Cinda Scott, who is a marine biologist, educator, and ocean equity advocate, who is currently the director of the School of Field Studies in Panama.
Hi, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all today. Thank you very much for the introduction. So I started my journey, as I tell anyone who I think wants to go into environmental science. Well, you have to start with an undergraduate career. I think that's really important. And I happened to complete my undergraduate degree at Middlebury College in Middlebury, Vermont. And I had no idea what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to go into biology, but then there was this thing called environmental studies. And at the time, late 90s, that was Middlebury was one of the first colleges to come up with an environmental studies program and an environmental studies degree. And I was sort of stuck in the middle there, like, do I do biology? What is this ES? What is this environmental studies? And I started to take some of the environmental studies classes and I fell in love with it. I loved it mostly because our classes involved going into the field, looking at an issue, collecting data and analyzing it back in the lab. And oddly enough, that's exactly what I do with my students now. I fell in love with it so much that I made a career out of it. And I, for some reason, at some point, thought that I wanted to be a medical doctor. And I wound up doing a pre-medical post-baccalaureate program at Columbia University immediately following my undergraduate degree. And then I worked at the hospital and realized very quickly that I have absolutely no interest in people in that way. I love people. I just didn't need to see them that close. And I really actually very much enjoyed marine organisms, which I learned about doing a research experience for undergraduates. For those of you who aren't aware, there are so many opportunities in the field of environmental studies through the research experience for undergraduates program through the National Science Foundation. And I encourage each and every single one of you to look into that. And I think the REU experience was the first time I was exposed to molecular biology. And it was the first time I was able to like hold a shark and understand that I could use this organism to understand human disease. So there are other ways to study about us as humans, and you can do that through the study of fish. And so I wound up doing my PhD at the University of Miami's Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Science, which is now Marine and Atmospheric and Earth Science. So it's RASMACE now, I guess. I really flourished there because I started to really deeply understand that fish are our oldest vertebrate ancestors, and there's so much that we can learn from them. And I did learn so much by looking at the heritability of gene expression in fish and how that relates to human beings, especially with metabolic diseases. And after my journey and finishing my PhD in 2009, I really felt disconnected from people, I guess. And so I decided to do my own postdoc in basically at New York City College of Technology. I worked very closely under the provost to try to improve science, tech, engineering, and mathematics teaching and learning. And so I would go into classrooms and try to figure out, how do we make this better? How do we keep students engaged in STEM? How do I work with faculty to provide them with the tools that they need to succeed in retaining students in STEM? And so I did that for 5 years. I taught in the biology department, I taught the lecture, I taught lab, and I also oversaw an NSF award to promote STEM learning at this large commuter urban institution. And I learned so much. So at that point, I was kind of tired of living in New York City. And I said to myself, I'm a marine biologist. I need to be more involved with what at my core really gets me motivated. And that motivation is, I definitely think about a lot of equity issues, particularly as it relates to environmental studies and a lot of environmental justice issues. But more so, I wanted to do it internationally to understand other people's perspectives and what other people are experiencing around the world. And so then I found a job and a position in 2014 at the School for Field Studies. And we have 10 locations around the world, all serving undergraduates and some graduate students, but mainly undergraduates. And yeah, I had 2 weeks. I packed up my whole apartment, where everything is still in storage 9 years later. I need to actually deal with that. And I moved to Panama, to Bocas del Toro, which is on the Western Caribbean coast, right next to Costa Rica. And yeah, I basically just got up and moved, because I think part of this journey in life is taking risks. And I definitely took a big risk because, we're not considered some big university where you're doing all this big research, but I've really appreciated being able to change and sculpt the lives of so many students who are very much wanting to have a career in environmental studies. And that's exactly what I do. And I feel so proud to be able to do that. So I think on the next slide, yeah, so there are many other things that I am besides a scientist. I am a dog lover. I have a dog. His name is Professor Webster. I love to travel. I mean, part of the reason why I took this job is because it is international, and I get to go to our other centers. So far I've been to the Cambodia Center. That picture there is in Cambodia. I've been able to go to our center in Tanzania, in Costa Rica, in Turks and Caicos, Panama. And I just love to travel, and I love diving in all the places that I get to travel. So in Tanzania, diving in Zanzibar, or doing my sabbatical in Mozambique, and being in Tofu, and being able to see all the beautiful organisms in the Indian Ocean. That was spectacular. I'm also a dancer. I've danced my entire life. I love underwater photography, and I think it's important that you always learn. I learn every day. And I know that sounds cliche, but I really do. I learned something from my students. I learned something from living in the rainforest. I learned something from just snorkeling. I see something and I'm like, I never noticed that worm does that before. So I think it's really important to be very observant of the environment around you. Okay, next slide. So what do? I definitely am involved in community-based conservation work, and I am 100% for including people in all aspects of conservation. And I think for a very long time, and these are also pictures that I took, that's a staghorn coral, Aquapora cervicornis on the top, and that's a manta ray that I got to see in Mozambique on the bottom there. But I think we went through a period where we were definitely doing a lot of fortress conservation. Keep the people out and everything will be fine. And the reality is it doesn't work. And we know that marine protected areas, majority of them do not work. And a lot of that is because we've excluded the very people who live around those areas. And we need to start doing a better job of incorporating all voices, not just the voices of the people in conservation organizations, but the voices of everybody who lives around those areas. And so right now I work very heavily with several indigenous Nobe communities here in Bocas del Toro to get their perspectives and understand their voices, particularly surrounding marine habitats and marine protected areas. And I heavily promote equity in ocean spaces. I think it's important to understand that not everyone has the same access to marine resources. And I feel it's part of my mission to bring to light some of the issues that are happening surrounding inequities in the use of marine and ocean spaces. Okay, next slide. Yep, that's it. That's all I have to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Scott. Now we'll pass it off to Dr. Loboda to do her introduction.
Good morning, everybody, or evening, as it was pointed out. It is a pleasure to be here and have an opportunity to tell you about my journey in the environmental sciences and towards the chairship of geographical sciences at the University of Maryland. So I am a geographer. That can mean a lot of different things, because geography is an amazing interdisciplinary science that nobody actually knows much about at high school or even early in college career. So for me, being a geographer means that I use amazing satellite imagery and geospatial data science to extract meaningful information that describe the world and helps us solve different challenges. some related to climate change, some related to other aspects of environmental change. And for me, I'm mostly focusing on fires and malaria. So wildland fire has been my interest for the last 2 decades. That's always been fascinating, and you'll find out why on the next slide. But I also always was was always passionate about biological diversity. Biodiversity, I focus on terrestrial systems. I link a lot of my work to climate change challenges. More recently, later in my career, I developed a research direction linked to public health. And generally, what I'm really, as a geographer, doing is looking at the interactions between the human systems and the physical systems on the landscape and how they manifest themselves in specific areas. What they mean for wildfire, what they mean for disease outbreaks. They're going to always be there together. And that's what makes us geographers different from many other disciplines. We recognize that humans are kind of the central piece of every challenge that we deal with. So by excluding humans from environmental science, it makes systems even less predictable than what you would expect. I've taught a lot of courses at the University of Maryland, but I mostly focus on technical applications. I teach a lot of courses in computer programming and satellite image analysis. And that really reflects that the modern geographical sciences, especially the way it is at the University of Maryland, is really kind of an overlap between computer science, data science, and earth system science and human environment interactions. So next slide, please. My path to environmental science was a little convoluted. So I started in the early 90s as a bachelor student at the Moscow Pedagogical State University. I really wanted to be a linguist. So I really loved English. That was awesome. That's what I wanted to do. Fortunately for me, I was able to get into a double major that focused on both English and geography. Didn't care about geography at the time. And it's only not until I got into the studies, deep into studies of geography, when I just gasped and understood that geography was really what I was passionate about. And English was just going to help me kind of survive in the environment. So having finished my bachelor's in Moscow, I had an opportunity to become a volunteer at Shenandoah National Park. I had a year-long internship in Shenandoah National Park, Virginia. And there you see me in '99 when I moved to Virginia. And I tried during my internship all kinds of things. I was an interpreter and the park ranger. I cleaned and fixed signs across the park. I sprayed pesticide to prevent native hemlocks, eastern hemlocks, from being killed out by the hemlock woolly adelgid. I did a lot of trail maintenance and learned to operate chainsaws. But the biggest life-changing experience was I got trained as a wildland firefighter. And during that season, I got to fight fires in Shenandoah National Park. And from that moment on, my life was just changed. There was no going back to teaching English after that. Next slide, please. Having been introduced to the amazing geographic information systems of wildland firefighting, I realized that I wanted to pursue my graduate degree, and I joined the University of Maryland, Department of Geography at the time, for a master's degree. And that's where I discovered satellite remote sensing on top of it. And that was the next mind-blowing thing. And I've been doing satellite remote sensing and wildfire studies ever since. Following my master's degree, I got PhD focusing on the impact of wildfire, climate change, on wildfire, and subsequently on the habitat of the Amur tiger. That's the Siberian tiger that lives in the Russian Far East. I had so much fun during my PhD. I wanted to do research for the rest of my life. Next slide, please. So at this point, wildfire continues to be my major direction in my work. I've done a lot of work from developing algorithms to looking at post-fire impacts on different ecosystems. And that picture on the left of the slide is me trying to figure out what impact tundra fires in Alaska have on permafrost degradation. Phenomenally interesting and important component. And most of my work on wildfire has been funded through NASA. I work very closely with NASA scientists and other people who are involved in satellite remote sensing. And we have a very big and robust community that does a lot of fun and important things. On the right is my more recent kind of research interest opportunity development. Through a series of very fortunate events, I started working with the medical researchers at the University of Maryland in Baltimore. And jointly, we got funded a regional center of excellence in malaria research, where my role was to support development of a capacity to predict outbreaks of malaria using satellite observations and other research that was going on at the time. And that's me on the back of the motorcycle. That's the only really way to get around in the rural areas in Myanmar. Next slide, please. So for my most recent one was, I was part of the NASA Arctic Boreal Vulnerability Experiment for a while. And as part of that work, we do a lot of field data collections. So what we're trying to do is to understand how vulnerable and how resilient these unique tundra ecosystems are to the rapidly changing environment. Climate change is affecting the globe as a whole, but it's really affecting high northern latitudes in the most profound ways. So what we're doing there is collecting data in these completely inaccessible areas. So we're flying out on a fixed wing plane, and then we're rafting down the river with a very small crew for 2 weeks, landing and collecting data in these areas that are hundreds of miles away from the nearest populated place. And that helps us to understand how the ecosystems are changing. And then we're linking it to satellite observations so we can expand our small sample of field observations across the region. Next slide, please. In the malaria part, I have to work with the local practitioners and medical researchers in trying to understand how the environment really impacts the disease transmission and the potential for disease outbreaks, so we can support the resource allocation and help tell public health practitioners where they need to go to help people who are most vulnerable for malaria outbreaks in Myanmar. Unfortunately, after the coup in Myanmar, we had to close the program. We're not allowed to work with this illegitimate government of Myanmar at this point. And unfortunately, it has impacted the fight against malaria globally in a very, very bad way. Next slide. I think that's my last one. Yes, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Loboda. I find your path really interesting, and it shows how taking advantage of the opportunities given to you can help you find a passion that you never knew you wanted to pursue. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Gnanadesikan, who is a professor and incoming chair in the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences at Johns Hopkins University.
Hi, and thank you for spending a bit of the time with us this morning. It's great to be on the panel with Cinda and Tatiana as well. So I'm an oceanographer, which means I study how the ocean center interacts, circulates, and overturns. Up on the left, there's a little schematic of the circulation of the ocean centered around the Southern Ocean with branches going off into the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Ocean. And I study the physics that determine that overturning. And I'm interested in how it interacts with the biosphere. So down at the lower left, you see a picture of diatoms, which are glassy shelled organisms. In the time that I've been talking, half of the breaths that you've taken have been produced by, originally can be traced to those little glassy shelled organisms. I also think about how the ocean interacts with the atmosphere. The picture on the upper right shows El Nino, which is a phenomenon that you probably all heard of, which involves a shift in temperatures and clouds over the Central Pacific Ocean that has climatic effects around the world. And I've done a little bit of work on how the ocean interacts with the cryosphere. The picture on the lower right there shows water flowing under ice shelves around Antarctica, and the extent to which those ice shelves break up and release the ice behind them into the ocean is a major driver of climate change vulnerability in the future. Next slide, please. So I do this in two ways. I use computational Earth system models, and in a computational Earth system model, a schematic of which is on the left there, we break the Earth up into our systems up into horizontal and vertical grids. We start off with an estimate for the temperature and moisture in each of those boxes. We compute pressures. The differences in pressures give us forces, which give us velocities. The velocities move around the temperature and moisture. We have clouds that result from particular configurations of temperature and moisture. And then we update that and run that millions of times on massive supercomputers. So the models that I run at Johns Hopkins are relatively small models. They still can take a month to run 100 years on 200 of your processors. So take 50 or so of your home laptops, chain them together and run them for a month. That would be one calculation. In addition to using those Earth system models, I also try to do data synthesis with large data sets. So the plot on the right shows just a relationship between light on the horizontal axis and a measure of the biomass of phytoplankton on the vertical axis. And you look at that and it's a mess, but we can use advanced artificial intelligence technique, machine learning, tree-based methods to try to map out what the different clusters are, and the different clusters are shown by those red points. And if you actually look at what distinguishes one cluster from another, you find that some of them have high nutrients and some of them have high iron. And so this is a way in which we can help develop these models. And these models are really the drivers of how we evaluate and project future threats from climate change. So making them more accurate, making them more physically sound is a really important activity, and it's one that I've been involved with for over 30 years. Next slide. A little bit of my story. I'm the one on the right there in the upper right. I've been fascinated by the ocean for a long time. This is me on Cape Cod when I was, I think, 8. I find it terribly amusing that, you know, my brother's running up and down the beach and I'm the one picking up shells and looking at them. So I was always interested in the ocean. I had the opportunity to grow up going to the ocean as a child and spent a lot of time in water, became very comfortable around water. then I went to college and I was a physics major, and I was interested in the problem of turbulence and chaos, because in the mid 1980s, this was something that it was just being realized, that the classical picture that if we understand that simple equations can produce complex behavior was really coming to the fore. And in the fall of my sophomore year, I took a course from the gentleman at the upper middle, Jorge Sarmiento, who's a biogeochemical oceanographer at Princeton University, and realized that while I was taking quantum mechanics on one hand and physical oceanography on the other, in quantum mechanics, there are 3 problems that you can solve exactly, maybe 4, and you spend the entire year doing them. In oceanography, if I tell you something about the ocean, very quickly you will be able to ask me questions that I can't answer. The questions are much closer to the surface than they are in physics, and though the answers are still very difficult to come by. I then went off and did a PhD at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Cape Cod, and my PhD was on a phenomenon that's shown in the upper right there. So if you look at that water, you'll see that there's streaks of light and dark that more or less line up with the wind. So this is a kind of ocean turbulence called Langmuir circulation. And my PhD was on understanding the physics that drive it and trying to show that it was produced by an interaction between the wind and the waves. After that, I returned to Princeton and worked at the Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Lab in Princeton. GFDL is the place that developed climate models starting about the year I was born in 1967. And I had the privilege of working with and taking courses from some of the great names in the field, some of the people who really developed the first climate models. And then I went back there and I worked on improving the physics of the ocean models. One of the things I worked on was understanding the circulation of the ocean. So in the lower left is a picture of the global ocean circulation with the red lines showing warm water flows, the green line showing coolish water flows, and the blue showing cold water flows. And that large-scale conveyor belt circulation both provides nutrients to the surface and sequesters carbon in the deep ocean. If it were not for this circulation, the atmosphere would have much more carbon dioxide in it, and the Earth would be much hotter. I'm also very involved in education and mentoring. The lower center picture there is my Science Olympiad team. I started doing Science Olympiad when my daughter was a 6th grader. And this is my 20th year still involved with doing Science Olympiad. This is our national championship team from 2007 in Wichita State. And I'm going back to Wichita in a few weeks to help run the hydrology event there. So one of the things that I do is to volunteer now in the Baltimore City Public Schools, working with trying to get students exposed to science. And we had a Science Olympiad team that just finished 19th at States. And so I've seen the breadth of the educational system here in the country. And this one reason that I'm really appreciative of what this group does, because not everyone has the exposure to science that students in suburban upper middle class American schools do. In addition to that, I like to cook and I like to sing, and this is a very bad picture of me singing in my church choir. So I'm going to turn it over to the organizers for questions, and thank you all for being here.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Gnanadesikan. It was very interesting to see how you work in the interdisciplinary field of oceanography, computer science, and physics. And yeah, your projects are very interesting. I'll pass it on to Eileen to talk about the next part of the panel.
Great, thanks, Anaga. So before we open up the floor to live questions, we wanted to ask one of the most popular questions we got on the RSVP form. And for panelists, feel free to just piggyback off of each other's responses. So we basically wanted to ask how you view the environment changing in the upcoming years, and what would you say to young people who want to do more to change our planet for the better?
Well, maybe I can start with that, because as sort of the senior person in the room, I've been working on climate change for 30 years. And unlike a lot of people, I'm an optimist, and this may be because, unlike Cinda, I don't work with coral reefs. But when we started working on climate change, when the first models came out in the 1980s, there was no sense that the world would respond to the climate change problem. And over the past 30 years, we have changed the trajectory of warming from 4.5 degrees centigrade to 2.5 degrees centigrade. So we've come actually 2/3 of the way to where we need to be to avoid the worst impacts. That's the good news. The bad news is that one of the reasons we come 2/3 of the way to avoid the worst impacts is that we've done the easier set of things. And so getting the last third of the way is going to be a real challenge, and it's going to involve people in business, and it's going to involve people in education, and it's going to involve people in politics, and it's going to involve people in law. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities, regardless of what your interests are, to participate in it.
Tatiana, did you? Oh, okay. I would just add that I wouldn't be here if I didn't have hope. And I'm diving a lot and snorkeling a lot and seeing in real time the loss of some major habitats, particularly in this area. And I went to this conference, and the woman was talking about eco-grief, which is how I got involved with sort of understanding and studying ecological loss in remote areas and how that's impacting people. But in doing that work, I do see that people, as much as they're hurting, they also care so much. And I think it's really easy in the US to feel disconnected from what's happening in the rest of the world, particularly in remote regions like Bocas del Toro. And I think it's up to each and every single one of us to really change the way that we behave. And changing human behavior is really difficult. And it's going to take all of us to sort of wake up and, know where your stuff comes from, know where your food comes from, know where your clothes come from, know where every single thing that you consume comes from. And you can begin to make changes yourself, because what you do in the US affects everywhere else in the world, just as what I do here. I actively choose, because I'm able to ride an electric bicycle. Does everybody have the opportunity to ride an e-bike to work? Absolutely not. Am I extremely privileged to do that? Yes. So it's being aware of your privilege, being aware of how you can actually make a difference and change things. But doing it within reason and doing it in a way that respects and enhances other people.
I wanted to mention also that there is a lot of things you can do, but there is another thing that you could consider, and that's helping us to understand better what's actually happening. Because for all the amazing work that we have done over the past, I want to say 50 years, in trying to understand how the Earth system functions and how they're changing, there's so much we still don't know. And the more we learn, the better we can understand how we can design the most meaningful responses to climate change. Essentially, what will give us the biggest bang for the buck, right? Because there's so much we can do, and some things are going to be more impactful than others. And part of that answer we don't know, because we don't really know the full impact of how the world is changing and how that feeds back into the climate system. So the thing to understand is both what Anand and Cindy said is Earth is a system. Every decision feeds back into the system, right? And it's constantly impacting everything. And that's the complexity that we're continuing to learn about. So even if you wanted to join us just to help us understand how the world is changing, I think that would be a tremendous help towards getting a better future for everybody on this planet. not people.
And I would also just echo that we are in the middle of this great energy transition and great push towards climate mitigation, but we are not often thinking about the impacts of that transition itself, right? Making sure that we do it in the right way. What are going to be the effects of changing from a system that uses hydrocarbons to one that's limited by metals? What are the idea of an idea that I've come across in recent years that I really like is the idea of planetary health, and that treating it as an integrated system where we don't just focus on global warming. Oh, you have fever, but maybe you have some other things too that you need to deal with. And so and I think there's lots of opportunities there for people to think about what's the impacts not only of the problem, but the impacts of the solution, and how do you choose between solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys so much for those insightful answers. Yeah, I definitely think it's important to think about the consequences of each action on the environment, and that like no step is too small, like Dr. Loboda was saying. And that like it's definitely everybody's responsibility to help with this. Great. Okay, Anaga, do you want to start?
Yeah. So since we're reaching the end of the panel, we want to open up the floor for the audience to ask questions. So please feel free to unmute or drop a question in the chat, and we'll try to go through as many as we can within the time. Okay, so we have our first question in the chat. What overlaps does environmental science have with other fields, and how can people from these other fields use their skills to help the environment?
Tatiana, why don't you take that one, because you're probably the most interdisciplinary department among us.
I see, and that's the challenging part. Every single field has an overlap with its environmental science. You can be a mechanical engineer overlapping with environmental science. You can be a public health practitioner, a marine biologist, and computer scientist, a finance. Finance has huge impact on environmental science. So essentially, environmental sciences underlying just about the rest of the global well-being, planetary health and well-being concept, and any field, I can't think of anything that does not have a connection. It's just how you're going to express it.
Yeah, I agree with that statement really strongly. I'm glad you said that, how you identify with it, because in my own career, I'm a trained marine molecular evolutionary genomicist, but I'm an environmental scientist too, right? So I also look at human systems and how they impact and influence biological and marine systems. And I think I'm not a social scientist, but I am.
Yes.
In order for me to understand ecological loss and grief amongst indigenous communities and how that relates to the ocean and inequity, I have to understand a little bit about social science as it relates to environmental science, as it relates to marine science. So I'm utilizing all of those fields, all of those backgrounds, all at once. And I can't do one without the other. I need all of them to do that.
You know, I'm trained as a marine physicist, and my core expertise is in turbulence. But the thing I've been excited about most in the last 2 years is learning to use the Kyoto Encyclopedia of Genes and Genomes. And, because it turns out that the distribution of genes in Chesapeake Bay is strongly physically controlled. And if you want to understand how to model the dead zone in Chesapeake Bay, which is a huge issue in this region, you need to understand both the physics and the biology. So I work with biologists, physicists, and chemists, and to some extent now social scientists as well. So.
Yeah, there's a question that just flashed up that I don't think you can really consider environmental science or environmental studies as its own field. And I've never considered it that way, because it is so highly interdisciplinary. I mean, it does, obviously, if you go into a university, you're going to sign up for environmental studies or environmental science, right? But really, that department might be grabbing from other people of different disciplines to create that department. So in an environmental studies department, you're going to have a physical oceanographer, you're going to have, you know, a geologist or whoever it might be, right? You're going to have a bunch of different people with different backgrounds, which I think is really exciting, because you get to draw upon all the expertise of all these different people that make up this so-called field, right? But really, it's highly specialized people that are utilizing bits and pieces from other fields and other expertise to come together to try to understand Earth systems, really.
Right.
Right.
And
And that requires, sorry, go ahead, Anand.
So I think the key is that the field is often very much problem-based rather than technique-based, and we break our disciplines into techniques. You know?
And yeah, I was going to say something very similar. The reality of the world is that it's complex, right? And it definitely does not occur within disciplinary boundaries. So as we're moving from this disciplinary view of the universe, we become really compelled to work in interdisciplinary teams. We each have a strong, deep expertise in one field, but we are multilingual disciplines-wise, so that we can have conversations, meaningful conversations with scientists in other disciplines, so that we can collaborate. So that's multilingual, and being able to talk to other disciplines is really, really important for environmental science specifically.
Thank you guys so much for your answers. We have another question in the chat from Sanghyun. It says, "It sounds to me that working out in the field, exploring environments, and engaging with nature during research is quite common as an environmental scientist. How does physically being out in the field affect your research in terms of how data is analyzed, or how it might be different from basing research purely on data?"
So I'm a field, essentially I'm a field scientist, whether that's in the natural or social sciences. I think for me, it's more tangible. In other words, I feel that being in the field pushes me more, because I see in real time in the field what's going on. You know, obviously I have to take the time to go back to my lab or whatever and reflect on the data and what's happening, but there's something very energizing about being able to go to the field to see the physical space, to see the organisms, to see how there might be change or responses, to talk with people in different communities, to understand their struggles and their fears and their hopes and desires. And for me, it's very impactful, and I love being in the field. I mean, the school I work for is the School for Field Studies. That's why I'm here. And yeah, for me, it's very powerful, because I feel like I can make that direct link, and I'm sure others would feel the same. You know, you get to really breathe in everything, and I love it.
And for me, it's really important because it provides the context. I can literally do everything without ever setting foot outside my office, because I use satellite remote sensing. But if I don't have the context of what it is that I'm looking at, right? what the trees look like. What do people grow on the ground? How do they move in this area? I can't create a conceptually meaningful model for how malaria can be transmitted if I don't have that background context. I can put, variables into the model that are not at all meaningful and do not reflect the reality of the situation. And then I will be dumbfounded why my model is not performing very well. And it's simply because I don't understand what's going on the ground. So being out in the field is absolutely critical.
Yeah. I mean, I'm the least field oriented of the three of us. Although I did do some field work during my PhD. And I think as someone who spent most of my life in front of a computer, I think that the field work, doing some field work in your career is really important, because then you don't think that data comes out of a computer the way that milk comes out of a carton, right? That there's actually, there's a cow behind the milk, and there's grass and fertilizer and manure and all of these other things. And I think it is very easy for students who haven't done any field work to actually believe that, oh, here's some data. That's the truth, right? That's the way the world works. And no, you have to have a proper humility and recognize that sometimes the data is right, sometimes it's wrong. In my career, there have been at least 3 cases where we looked at data that came back from some satellite product or observations, and no, the data was wrong, and the models and conceptual models were in fact correct. It didn't make sense because there were problems there. And so I think that having that experience helps, even if, like me, you spend 95% of your time doing computational work, maybe 98% of your time doing computational work, is really important, because that, as Tatiana was saying, the model is not the real world and the data is not the real world. It's a representation of it, and it's modulated through human experience. And sometimes something as simple as whether the tech dropped the thermometer on the ground before he took the measurement.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys so much for those responses. Unfortunately, we'll have to conclude this portion of the panel since we're getting close to the end of the event. We're running a little bit over 10 Eastern time, but I think we'll just wrap up now. So before we do it, we actually wanted to take a quick Zoom screenshot with all of our panelists and attendees for our social media recap post. So I think Annie will be taking that. So if you guys want to turn on your cameras, please feel free to do so now. Let me see if I can. Yeah, Annie, do you want to go to gallery view?
Yeah, I can take it.
Okay, awesome.
All right, sorry, let me just get situated. All right, ready? 3, 2, 1. And then I'm going to take another one. 3, 2, 1. Okay, perfect. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Yeah. If you guys would like to be tagged in our Instagram post, please type your Instagram handle in the chat below. And if you already put your Instagram handle in the RSVP form, you'll already be tagged.
Great. So next we'll be sharing the contact information for all of our panelists for any questions that you guys have that we couldn't get to today. So feel free to take a screenshot of the slide if you have any further questions and would like to reach out. Great. Now I'll pass it off to Annie to tell you about how you can get involved with STEM to the Sky.
Yeah, so if you would like to get more involved with STEM to the Sky, whether that be joining our team or staying along with the different events and different activities that we do, you can always check out our website, which is stemtothesky.org. And then here are all of our platforms. So if you have any questions or anything you want to talk to us about, you can always email us, stemtothesky@gmail.com. You can also subscribe to our mailing list. If you go to the website and scroll, I think all the way to the bottom, there's a place for you to sign up for our mailing list there. You can also follow us on our Instagram, Twitter, or LinkedIn. The Instagram and Twitter handles are just Stem to the Sky. And then the LinkedIn is just Stem to the Sky. I think if you look it up, you'll be able to find it. And then also please try to subscribe to our YouTube channel. That really helps us be able to get our content out there. So people, to help people find our interviews and different things like that. If you're interested in joining our team, we have departments across any of the different kind of things that we do. So we have a marketing and outreach team, which Anaga is a part of. We have interview team, the people who do the interviews. We have web development. We have content development. We have graphic design. We have, I think that was most of them. But in general, we have a lot of teams for any interest that you possibly have or want to contribute. So this is a great opportunity if you're a high school student to get involved with helping sharing STEM education to your peers and to other high school and middle school students around the world. So definitely consider joining. There's just a short application form on our website.
Thanks, Annie. And a special thank you to our wonderful panelists, Dr. Gnanadesikan, Dr. Scott, and Dr. Loboda for taking the time to talk to us today. It has been incredibly insightful to hear from all of you, and it was very inspiring to hear about your own respective paths and how young people can impact the climate positively today. And yeah, I'll be passing it on to Eileen.
Great, thanks everyone. So we want to thank all of our attendees for taking the time out of your day to attend this event. Again, if we couldn't get to your questions today, please feel free to reach out to us or to any of the panelists. We really hope that you enjoyed hearing from all of our panelists and that you gained some new insights today, and we can't wait to see you at future STEM to the Sky events. Also, if you guys have any additional questions or suggestions for STEM to the Sky, you can feel free to stay behind for a few minutes and we'd love to chat with you. But if not, thank you again and have an amazing rest of the day or good night to those joining internationally. Bye, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank
Nice to meet
you.
everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.